Oh, welcome back to Off the Curb. Crazy week this past week at Michigan State. I'm focused more on the Detroit Lions in this exact moment in time. And I always am amused by the analytics on my Twitter following. I was not very big on the Detroit Lions selecting a running back 12th overall. I think it was a big mistake in taking Jahmyr Gibbs. I immediately saw about 150 followers go out the door. So I have to try to win those people back. But I do have my own reservations, but I'm not going to continue to express them today. I want to bring someone in from the outside of this Detroit bubble where I think it's very easy to become provincial and bow to the feet of the Detroit Lions no matter what they do, to get some perspective to see, am I on to something where I am with this Lions take? So Seth Walder of ESPN, a bright guy, longtime analytics writer, has a lot of experience covering football in New York with the Jets, so he knows what dumb decision making looks like. He was no fan of the Lions draft. So here's his take, and then I'm going to bring him in to weigh in on it. So this is Seth Walder, again, ESPN analytics writer, weighing in on the Lions draft, a compression of a couple of his different takes here. Quote, I give the entire ordeal an F. The selection of Jahmyr Gibbs was an awful mismanagement of positional value, comes with massive opportunity cost, the chance to draft a player worthy of the 12th overall pick, and was a reach for a player who likely would have been available later. The Lions ran a clinic on one of the easiest ways to have a bad draft, drafting players before you need to. Okay, Seth, I'm going to bring you in. They've been yelling at me for 5 days. I'm done. I'm going to let them yell at you for a little bit. What do you make of this? Why do you not like what the Lions did here?
Well, I think the word, I do want to separate out, like, I'm not saying that their entire draft was an F. I think what I'm talking about in that paragraph there was sort of was the Gibbs selection. That was in the context of the Swift trade, where I felt like they actually got pretty good compensation in my mind for Swift, given the circumstances they were in, but the circumstances they were in was of their own creation, right? But overall, I feel like the first 2 and 3, really 3 picks from Detroit in a draft when they had a lot of draft capital were really wasted in several different ways, because they both failed on the positional value part of the draft, and then they failed in terms of drafting players earlier than they need to. And I say that with like the full understanding that we may not know, right? There are situations, and I know the Lions felt like someone else might have taken Gibbs between 12 and 18, and I would say probably not, but it's possible. But like, also, if that's the thing you're worried about, I mean, you're losing a running back in the mid-first round. I don't think that's bad. We may not know. There are times when we may not know. A player might have been liked by the league more than people let on, and that does happen, and that's fair. But I do think that there are also a lot of times when teams reach, and we know that you shouldn't, both because they tend to fall short of their draft slot when you reach, and then more important, because you're just wasting your draft capital, right? If we could push down each one of the Lions picks in this draft and they ended up with the same players, that would be immensely valuable, because you'd be gaining a player at a 12th overall pick. So overall, I felt like this is a very poor day one first, very, very poor day one, I guess I would say, for Detroit.
So, I mean, if you're Brad Holmes, and I mean, I preface this whole thing that I agree with you, but I'm trying to be objective and see the other side. So if you are Brad Holmes and you identify with your staff this player, in this case, Jahmyr Gibbs, as not maybe the missing piece, but a missing piece, you love the player, you feel like you have a hole there, this guy's really going to bring together the Ben Johnson offense and open up all these possibilities in terms of the playbook. And you've granted that you don't know about if someone's going to be there or not, because even if you think the Detroit Lions are stupid, it only takes one other stupid team to take the guy that you want to slide down back farther for. Is there any argument in your perspective that's fair that says, you know what, I don't care if I'm reaching a couple spots. This is our guy. I don't want to risk it. We're just going to stay at 12 and take the guy that we want. Is there any merit to that strategically?
No, I don't think so, because the reality is like that would work. That would be a fair argument if teams were better at predicting the draft. But we know that there's so much uncertainty in these prospects that you are overconfident. You are overconfident in your own ability to evaluate this player, especially relative to the rest of the draft, right? So Gibbs going into the draft is thought of as a late first round pick. And so if you are saying, I think he's worthy of the 12th overall pick, you're already out on a ledge on this guy. And again, maybe the league thought better of him than we realized. But I think the mistake that teams repeatedly make in the NFL draft is their own overconfidence in their ability to evaluate player X versus player Y. And so in this case, to do that for potentially, within the argument of least valuable position among offensive and defensive positions, to me, I just can't see how that's really defensible.
Is there a hindsight 2020 pathway to vindication here? I mean, let's just for the sake of argument say, for Brad Holmes' sake, in terms of vindication, Jahmyr Gibbs ends up being a star, one of the top 5 running backs in the league by every metric, high impact guy. Jack Campbell, he finishes 3rd in Rookie of the Year voting on the other side of the ball. Laporta looks great right away. I don't know. The Kelsey is pretty ambitious, but let's say just a top 10 tight end by year 2. I mean, does that vindicate it? Is your argument, is your angle like it's harder to be right, or there's really no scenario where this is the best path forward for them? What's your take on that?
I like to separate these things out into like 2 different categories. So can this work out for Detroit? Yeah. Oh, totally. I mean, obviously these players could be superstars. And if you just drafted 2 Hall of Famers, then yeah, of course it worked out for you. I think to me, the question is, can you look back and defend the process that got there? And that's one where I'm not going to say I would rule it out, because I think we could, we're always learning more about evaluating players and what's predictive and positional value. And it's possible we can look back on these things differently. I just don't see how we can get to I just don't see how, based on what we currently know about football and players and positional value, that we can get to a place where we would say this is good process. I'm not going to rule it out, but I think those are 2 very different things. I think you can say this could work out, and also say it doesn't mean it was the right move. Like, I think we can say Atlanta trading up for Julio Jones worked out. Do I think that was good process? Not at all. Right. And that still hasn't changed.
So I'm curious for your perspective, because one of the counter arguments here locally anyway, and I have heard it elsewhere in other markets to defend different picks, is, okay, like I like the analytics stuff, but in this particular case, there's an argument to eschew the analytics and just go with that one missing piece, a little component of what we were talking about earlier. Just take the Lions out of it as a general matter. I know you are literally, your title is analytics reporter, analytics writer. This is your background and your forte and your strength. But is there generally a situation where you could see a team doing something objectively, in most cases weird, like taking a running back in the first round, especially the top half of the first round, and say, well, for that team, their current roster construction, defensible, that running back is so good. Let's say it's a team that was stacked everywhere else, and they took Bijan Robinson in the top 10. And they just, for some reason, had that pick. I mean, is there some situation where you can eschew the analytics? Or are you more beholden to, like, look, you got to stick to that process irrespective of other criteria and variables?
Well, I think there's 2 different things here, but I think there's like, one is like, people feel like, well, if you love the player, go get your guy, right? That's like, we hear that all the time, right? That's my favorite one. Because what do you think all those other teams in the past that traded up, do you think that they hated the guy that they traded up for? No, they had conviction too. They felt like, I got to go get that guy. And what do we know? We know that from history that trading up is in general a losing proposition. It doesn't mean it can't work out, but in general, on average, it's a losing proposition. And teams always think that they're trading up for a player that's really going to help them, for the missing piece, for someone who's a game changer. That's why you make those moves, but on average, they fail to do so. I think the running back part, no, I do not see a situation where I'm taking a running back in the top 10 under any circumstances based on what I currently know about football and how we evaluate the game. I thought my colleague Bill Barnwell did a story about a month ago about Bijan Robinson and about running back value and about I thought it was a really good way of kind of laying out the case and the arguments for and against, and he ultimately came to the same conclusion that you really couldn't. I do believe that what you said. I will say this: there is a part of what you said that I do think has merit, which is the idea that if you are a super contending team, that a running back makes more sense for you. That is true because running backs basically peak at the very beginning of their careers in the NFL. And so you are getting the best of that guy, right? I think that's a reason why like the Falcons taking Bijan Robinson. I mean, that's a team nowhere close to winning, and you're going to burn his best years while you don't have a quarterback. Like that, to me, that makes that pick even worse. I do think there is merit in the sense that you could justify spending more on a running back if you're like a true title contender. Yeah, I see that. I don't see using a one on them, but a top 10 pick, no way.
I mean, the Lions.
It's also because of it's both because the position doesn't. It's for all the reasons are like the position doesn't affect the game that much. It's affecting the game that's the less efficient part and the less variant part. You're trying to win the Super Bowl, which means you need the best offense, which means you need the best passing offense, with some exceptions. And then structurally, the league has told us it's not an important position. And then structurally, because of that, the players cost less, right? You can acquire a running back super cheap in the free agent market. And that means that when you're not getting a lot of value out of the running back that you draft, even if they're a star, they're not a huge value. And then they might be a light value if they're really good. But then you've given up the opportunity where you could have had a tackle or an edge rusher or a wide receiver, someone who would be really expensive on the open market that you could have gotten at that spot. It would be a huge value.
Is the argument sort of in your camp mitigated or weakened at all by the nature of Gibbs as a player in that he's supposedly going to line up in the slot a lot? He's considered more of a hybrid. That's a lot of the pushback I got was, don't call him a running back, bro. This guy's more of a hybrid receiver. Like, is there any sort of mitigation to the weight of the analytical argument saying this guy's not truly like a 35 carry, running back from 1986?
I think so. I think there is fairness in that. Like if you ask me, well, if I'm going to draft, I'm going to draft a running back early. What would you like that running back to be good at? Like they have to be a really serious weapon in the receiving game to me. And so, yeah, I think to some degree that does mitigate what's going on with Gibbs. Now, if you say he's a running back who lines up in the slot a lot, it's like, okay, well, what do we think of like a player who lines up in the slot a lot? Like that's typically, and I know there are guys that get drafted in the first round now like that, but like that's typically a knock on a wide receiver, right? And so I think that is fair. In general, though, I think that is a mitigating factor, and I do think that gives you a little more potential if you are receiving back like that.
So, okay, yeah, fair enough. So not as egregious, but still not the right way to go would be.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think you can it's totally fair to make that point, and I think that point has merit. It doesn't mean I would take a player like that at 12, but it means I might take someone like that, all else being equal, higher than the average running back.
Yeah, and you're a little less appalled at 12. Yeah, I mean that was to me the best argument I heard. Where I was like, oh, okay. I mean, that's a little better than I was thinking about it going in. I'm still not in favor of it, even though I do like the player in a vacuum. Two more things for you. Hendon Hooker, we don't need a deep dive on that, but just in terms of your perspective analytically, where he was taken, trading up to go get him, which is always a bigger statement than if you sit there and draft somebody. What do you make of the Hendon Hooker pick, especially in light of this news that the Lions are discussing possible extension with Goff? There's talk, did they blow the pick? Just in terms of value on your charts, where do you have that Hendon Hooker pick? What do you make of that?
I liked it. I thought it kind of gives the Lions draft a lot of upside that prior to that, or maybe prior to the Branch pick, you didn't feel like they had. To me, Hooker is, look, there are questions here talking about a really old quarterback prospect, but he was efficient last year, and I think that he was being talked about as a borderline first round pick, and to take that guy in the third, I think that makes a lot of sense. Is it a long shot that he pans out? Yeah, but like they're kind of all long shots, and to me, it makes sense to be repeatedly taking risks on a quarterback and hoping that you hit. And when you're doing it with a third round pick, I mean, that is like really a very tolerable investment. And so it's like odds are this doesn't work out. And, a few years from now, the Lions are onto another quarterback, whatever, but that's fine. That's like totally tolerable risk for the chance that maybe there is something there. Obviously off the injury as well. So, so to me, like, why not? You have a quarterback. There's no pressure on Hooker off the injury to play right away. And I think it's worth the upside, even with those kind of drawbacks. I think it's a great pick, to be honest with you, in round 3.
That was my favorite pick, honestly, between him or Branch. I thought Branch was a good value, and especially with what we were seeing in his projections and having seen him play in college, I liked the Hooker pick a lot. I think he has a chance to be a great player, and if he's not, like you said, most of these guys don't pan out anyway. So I think in terms of the upside play, it was the way to go. I'll finish here. I'm much more sort of attuned to baseball analytics. I'm kind of a baseball dork in that regard. And, I realize that it's evolved, but certainly in the earlier days of that, you did see these correlations famously with the Moneyball Athletics. The Red Sox won titles on the backs of this to a large degree. Have we seen that correlation where, Seth Walder says, here's the 5 most attuned, analytically driven teams, and 4 of the 5 have been at least in the conference championship game? Have we seen that correlation between the quote unquote smarter teams analytically and actual on-field success? Has it translated how you might expect?
Not to the same degree. I think there's 2 major reasons. So the first is that in football, the quarterback drives so much, and maybe the quarterback and coach drive so much of how good you are, that if you're a super analytically advanced team without a quarterback, you can gain edges all around, and that's still not like as good as having Patrick Mahomes, not even close. So you've got that major obstacle, and then I think it hasn't been there's a huge range. I mean, it hasn't been super as widely embraced in the NFL, though to some degree you could say that makes it more advantageous for the teams that do embrace quantitative analysis. And in terms of the most analytically inclined teams, I think that we see, I mean, it is. I mean, I do a survey every year and ask analytics staffers about all 32 teams. And I think the Browns are clearly one. You're looking at Eagles, Ravens as the next tier, and then Bills and maybe Vikings now as being like 4 or 5, kind of, if you were to pick a 5 most analytically inclined teams. I mean, those are a good set of teams, I guess, on average, better than average set of teams, I suppose we could say. But like, is Buffalo good because they're analytically inclined, or because Josh Allen's their quarterback? And I think we know which one's like more important. I'm not saying the analytics are important. They're super important, right? Because like if you're in a front office, most of the time you can't control who your quarterback is. So the best thing you can do is get everything else going to be as effective as you can. But I guess, but to answer your question, I don't think we've seen that like that sort of correlation that we might have that you might expect.
I mean, I could make an argument that you have to a lesser degree, maybe, but 4 of the 5 teams you mentioned have been pretty good the past 10 years. And the one, you're the darling, I guess, the Browns. everyone kind of has accepted the last 5 years. It's been one of the best rosters in the league,
Yeah.
sans the quarterback, which, pre Deshaun Watson. So, I think there is an argument actually. I'm taking your word for it on who's kind of the darlings of the analytical movement, but there's no crappy franchises in there except Cleveland, which goes along with your argument. No quarterback, none of this stuff matters, but they have assembled a pretty talented roster. So I think there is an argument, actually, maybe even better. I'm making it maybe more than you are, but I'm
Yeah.
starting to see that. But I'm
Your
curious to
paycheck
see,
is in the mail.
well, yeah, right. Yeah, get right to that. But yeah, I mean, the Lions, I've been mostly in favor of what Brad Holmes has done. I'm a big fan of what he's done for the most part in the draft in particular. I don't know what to make of this draft. I don't think it makes any sense on any objective, analytical, statistical level. You've outlined the reasons why, but I do think they are a good team that got better in some places that they were pretty weak, and to that extent, I'm hopeful. But we'll see, Seth. I mean, you and I were kindred on this in terms of not liking their draft. We're going to get made fun of a lot. We're going to get dunked on and freezing cold takes to death, or maybe we'll have a victory lap. I hope I'm wrong because I'm a Lions fan, but I appreciate you joining us, Seth. Thanks so much.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me. This is fun.
Seth Walder, ESPN. Thanks so much for joining us. So, Detroit Lions draft, I am done bitching about it indefinitely, not forever. I'm going to kind of leave it there and move on. I think we've said our piece on it, but I did want to get an objective, expert analytical analysis on it, and Seth did a great job. And check him out for sure. Really interesting stuff. Maybe you're going to be a little sensitive if you're a Lions fan, but Seth does a great job. And I think I get a little bit smarter following his stuff. I highly recommend him. We'll see where that goes. I'm back into my Michigan State zone now. So a lot to come ahead. The quarterback situation is a real whirlwind. We'll get to that. Spiro Avenue, off the curb. See you later. Thanks.